So nice to sit together in this embrace of the spring. Quite marvelous. You may have noticed the picture on the altar. My family's very good friend, Kija Lee. It's her birthday today. She passed away 4 years ago. Such a beautiful soul. So important to my family. So I'm feeling her presence in the cherry blossoms. Our symbol of impermanence and beauty. It's something that death reveals to us and life reveals to us, but perhaps death will make us listen in a different kind of way. So tonight is the first in a series of 6 teachings on the Diamond Sutra. And so I'm going to introduce that tonight, talk a little bit about it, and about how it is that we'll be studying together. And just so people know, if you're here in the hall, you should have received a copy of the first 5 sections of the Diamond Sutra, and we're not going to look at that yet. We'll get to it in a little bit, but I just wanted to make sure that you know that you have that. And then for everybody online, on the website where this class is, advertised or written about, right there on the front page, there's a link that I put in today. It's right there on the front page. It's also on the main page for this class, which says the Diamond Sutra. I think it says chapters 1 through 5 or sections 1 through 5, something like that. If you click on that link, then this PDF of this file should come up, and this will be the translation that we're using. Before we get into to that, I want to talk a little bit about Prajna paramita, which is the body of work from which this teaching comes. In a fundamental sense, the Prajna paramita is not a text. It's not a book. It's not a series of books. That's the way we often think about it. We say the Prajna paramita teachings or literature. There's many versions of the Prajna paramita, many different sizes. There's a Prajna paramita in 100,000 lines, Prajna paramita in 25,000 lines, Prajna paramita in 8,000 lines, Prajna paramita in 3,000 lines, and 750 lines, in 300 lines, which is the Diamond Sutra, so on, all the way down to Prajna paramita in 1 syllable. There's such a teaching. Yeah. But Prajna paramita fundamentally is not these series of texts. Prajna paramita is not a principle. It's not a dynamic. It's not a truth. It's not a key. It's not a technique. It's certainly not a secret, although it sometimes can feel like that, because it's so close, it's so intimate, that we can't see it as an object, so it seems like it's not there. So it seems secret, but actually is totally present. Prajna paramita is not the good news. Fundamentally, Prajna paramita is the living eye of wisdom. It won't be corralled or captured or cajoled in any of the ways that we typically try to extract meaning, that we try to make sense of things, that we try to figure them out and then put them in an order which will secure our position in one way or another. It's totally alive. The Prajna paramita is known as the womb of the Buddhas, or the mother of the Buddhas. It is this dark womb of complete embrace and is never barren. The womb itself emerges because there is a Buddha being born. And there's a Buddha being born. That Buddha being born emerges because there is a womb. They're completely inseparable. This dark emptiness simply is the fountain of a golden body. Golden body of the Buddha. The golden body of the Buddha is referred to in many, many texts, many, many teachings. The 32 marks of the Buddha is the way that our ancestors thought about what it would mean to encounter or to see a Buddha. They would have these attributes of awakening, and they numbered them 32. The Diamond Sutra has 32 sections. That's not by mistake. The 32 sections that were established in China by Emperor Wu's son. Emperor Wu is the famous emperor who Bodhidharma encountered, or he encountered Bodhidharma. They encountered each other when Bodhidharma came from India. He spent massive amounts of wealth building monasteries and supporting Buddhism. And while he was doing all of that, his son was diligently studying Buddhism, studying the Diamond Sutra. And he's the one who gave us this breaking up of the sutra into 32 parts, which is a kind of teaching, The 32 sections of this sutra are pointing us that this sutra is about the body of the Buddha. It's not about a book. It's about the eyes of a Buddha. It's about those dark pupils from which we see everything. The literal pupils of our eyes, but the pupil of our soul, of our deep mind, how it is that we encounter the world, is a living mystery, is a living wisdom, the fountain from which all Buddhas are born. The Buddhas present here in this assembly. So with this always birthing, we don't want to regard a teaching like this sutra as something that is out there, right? That we're going to take from out there and put in here. Although there is something for us to encounter, right? There is a teaching that will work on us. But the sutra can work on us, the teaching can work on us because it isn't essentially out there. It isn't just something which I'm going to try to master or I'm going to try to get. But it's also not true to say that the sutra is fundamentally in here. You already have the sutra. The sutra is already your body and mind. But it's not contained in your body and mind. It's coming forth as your body and mind. Mind and body are fundamentally undivided. The two are not divided against each other, and they're not divided themselves. Mind is not divided to an inside and an outside. Body is not divided into inside and outside. We just conveniently do all that all the time, right? We say, oh, this is my skin. So this is everything that's on the inside of this skin bag, that's my insides, and everything that's on the outside is my outsides. Very provisional. It's very like convenient, but that's about all. The same thing with my mind. All the thoughts that are inside. I think, oh, that's my insides. And then the world's out there. But if you pay attention to this, you'll see that it's just not really the case. There are no thoughts in here without an out there. And there's no one out there without the thoughts in here. Right? There's no inside of my physical body without all of the outside things, like air and food. And there's no outside out there if there's no insides in my body. I can't move around, I can't see, I can't hear, I can't smell or taste. Actually, I couldn't even think. You know, the people who studying consciousness from a scientific perspective now, that's one of the things that they become clearer and clearer about, is our consciousness is not just something that is, that then interacts with the world out there. But for us to have the consciousness that we have, there has to be things out there. Even for us to evolve, to evolve an ear takes sound, right? It's not just that the ear evolved to receive sound. It's that even for there to be sound, there has to be an ear. It goes both directions. So the sutra is telling us about this, right? The sutra is this. The sutra is expressing this. And so we have the various forms of the Prajna Paramita sutras. We have the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, the Transcending the Principle, the Great Prajna Paramita. All of these different things are inviting us. They're inviting us to this living wisdom, this living eye of the Buddha's awakening, the living body of the Buddha's awakening. So as we're studying over these next few weeks, it's going to be my intention to not explain things, but to simply express my own understanding of the Prajna Paramita, or my own encounter of it, as an invitation for you to also regard mind as this gateway for profound wisdom and compassion. If we encounter the sutra in this way, then it becomes our lifelong teacher, or maybe from a Buddhist perspective, we'd say our lives long teacher. So that's the point of this series, is I want to invite you to receive the Prajna Paramita as your good friend, and to start cultivating a relationship with the Prajna Paramita, so that you can receive that body of the Buddha, you can receive that eye of the Buddha, and then you can unfold it in your own life. That's what Buddhist teachings are about. They're about giving us an opportunity to discover something fundamental about ourselves. And so, how should you respond to the invitation? Or what are some possibilities of responding to the invitation? And from my experience, there's 4 things I'd like to encourage you to do in engaging this teaching. The first, and I think probably the most important one, is bring your true sincerity forward. Bring the part of you that's saying, I want to live wholeheartedly. I don't want to hold back. And I want to be real. I want to be true about what I'm doing. And I want to care for what I know is the most important. No one can tell you what that is or what it should be. Right? That has to come from your own heart. In Buddhism, we talk about the bodhicitta, the mind that seeks awakening, the mind that longs for total liberation for self and for all beings. When you're attracted to the teaching, sometimes it can be for a really clear reason, but a lot of times it's not so clear. We just feel like, there's something here, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but there's something here. I'm interested in it, or there's a pain in me, or there's something I saw, there's a settledness or a freedom that I saw in something or in someone, and I want to learn more about that. So bring that forward, Like, don't be afraid to have a desire for your life to transform. That's central to a Buddhist path. And bringing that kind of sincerity forward is to rely, it's to receive, it's to consult the teaching, not to understand it. Understanding is like capturing it. But when you bring that sincere heart forward, you say, oh, what could this teaching tell me about what that sincere heart is pointing me towards? If you don't bring that sincere heart forward, you probably fall into a kind of calculating understanding. Like, and that's really fun if you like philosophy or if you like that kind of thing. I had a friend who used to say, that Buddhist teaching, it's like chocolate for the brain. It's beautiful. It's like really sublime. And if that's what you're interested in, if your sincere heart is interested in that, I would say go for it 100%. For me, that's part of what was appealing to me. That's part of what my heart longed for, was a way of talking about things, a lexicon, a philosophical approach that had integrity, right? So I'm not saying that part is off the table. I'm just saying that if you don't bring your sincerity forward, you probably end up in just kind of speculation, kind of dry rationality in some way. So, your red heart, right? You're pulsing blood. Second thing I would recommend or advise you to is to receive thoroughly. If you think that you might come to all 6 of these teachings, or to the majority of them, if you're making that part of your plan for the next month and a half, read this every day. It's not very long. You can recite it. You can copy it. You could even memorize it. You memorize it, you could just say it while you're walking to work or going to bed at night, whatever it is. But receive it thoroughly means don't just think about capturing the meaning and then saying, well, I've read it, I have the meaning. But receive the words again and again and again and again and again and again and again. We have this practice of chanting sutras. And there's different reasons for that, but one of the reasons is just to get the sutras moving through us, right? To receive them and then to chant them. That cycle does something. It allows the medicine to go deep down into our being and the places where our discursive thinking can't really touch. And I'd say sit with it. As you're sitting meditation, or just sitting and listening to the birds, or enjoying the moon rising, or whatever it is that whatever it is that you like to do. Sitcoms, even, I suppose. Just let it be there. Sit with it. Let it mess with you. And I think this is an underappreciated aspect of teachings. In some ways, they are destabilizing. And so allowing those parts of like, and then let them roll around in you. Thirdly, and this is not so common in our Western way of thinking about Buddhism, but we certainly have it in Abrahamic faiths, and that is to venerate. To put this sutra in a high place, to make offerings to it, to appreciate that this body of the Buddha, this body of Dharma, is not containable. This is part of the purpose of veneration, or part of the actuality of veneration, is to realize that something cannot be contained in the way that I think it can. We're so used to objectifying things in the world, right? I mean, even things we really care about, or we think is really, really important. I went to this beautiful waterfall last weekend. It's on the upper Umpqua River. It's called the Watson Waterfall. Maybe some of you have been there before. It's just remarkable. And if I think of that waterfall, in a way, I just defile it, because I think it's a place. I think it's an image in my head. It's a memory, right? And it becomes small. It becomes like a thing I could go and encounter, as opposed to the raging river creaming over the cliff and then down this rocky side of this mountain. The sutras are like that. They're not containable as our reference point. Oh yeah, I'm studying the Diamond Sutra, right? So, what does that even mean? The Diamond Sutra is studying you, And so veneration is a way that we can remember the wholeness in which the sutra is not something for us to consume. The sutra is not something for us to receive in the sense that I have this piece of paper now and I'm going to kind of try to get it in me. But I'm going to say, oh no. This is something which is not containable in that way. It's not that it's bigger than you. It's not that you're small and it's big, and so you have to venerate it, right? It's that it's bigger than your grasping. Your grasping will always make it smaller. But you're not small like that. And so the veneration is a way to bring that forward. And the last thing I would say is don't be clever. Just don't be clever. It's just not worth it. It takes lots of energy. Not in the being clever part. That actually, if you're inclined towards cleverness, that part doesn't take that much energy. It's all the extra posturing that goes with being clever. Even if you're not being clever in front of other people, it's all the layers of your own kind of identity of being the one who knows, or being the one who could say something clever about it, or whatever, So, so watch for that. When you see it in yourself, you can chuckle about it. It's kind of funny, actually, to think that, I will understand, right? And I will use my mind that can model things really well, and then I'll be the one that understands. So you don't have to be harsh to yourself about that, but just chuckle and let it go. And the corollary to that is, if you're the kind of person who thinks of yourself as not clever, the kind of person who can't understand, I think you have a little head start on the people who are used to being clever. But be kind to yourself. I can assure you that you are fully endowed with this truth, with this understanding, with this capacity, with this wisdom. In either case, the main point is, don't just read, encounter, etc., to get the punchline. If you think there's a punchline, like this is the part that's the real part of the teaching, that if I could just figure out how this works, that I would get it all. When you're reading in that way, or studying in that way, or receiving in that way, then whether you think of yourself as the clever person or the unclever person, you always get tripped up. Oh yeah, I got the punchline. It's like this. or I'm not really sure, but I'm going to try really hard to pretend like I know what it is. Or, oh me, I'm not the person who can understand the punchlines. I have to get that from someone else. You know? Either way, you miss the point. You miss the point that each section, and we're going to work with each of the sections, each phrase actually is the teaching. It's not that there is one place that the teaching is contained in the sutra. The whole thing is the teaching. It's all the Buddha Dharma. It's all seeing with the Buddha eye. It's straightforward. It's unleveraged. And so this punchline looking, finding the principle, it just always sidetracks us. So when we study, we want to study in a much more holistic way. And by holistic, I don't mean that we just study the whole to the exception of the parts, but that we study the whole and the parts together, and we're always going back and forth. We're saying the whole significance of the teaching is reflected in any part. So as I'm trying to understand the wholeness of the teaching, I should pay attention to each little particular thing. And as I'm paying attention to each little particular thing, I should be paying attention to the whole. That kind of learning is a little different, and it goes a little different the way that we study. Kind of counterintuitively, it makes things like memorization and recitation much more important than we think. I was a school teacher for a really long time. I never made my students memorize anything. I thought that was the stupidest thing in the world. That's why there are books. It's written down, right? Like, why would you memorize it? But in the Buddhist world, I don't think that. Actually, if I could go back, I probably would make them memorize some things. But it's just that if we have the kind of mind that thinks that memorizing, if you've memorized it, that means you got it, then that's not right. But memorizing or reciting or just bringing it through us again and again helps us to pay attention to both the particular and the whole in a way that's harder when we're reading for meaning, which is most of what our education has taught us to do, at least in kind of modern Western context. Read for meaning, and then be able to remember these things. Like when you were in school, you had reading comprehension tests, right? And it's all about reading it, and then can you understand the meaning, and then can you replicate the meaning somewhere? So that's really good. That makes you smart, makes you clever, but it doesn't do some of these other things. So we want to have that faculty, but we don't want to over rely on it. Okay? Probably making my point for too long, but I'll encourage you in that way. So if you just take a look at the Diamond Sutra that's in front of you, and hopefully people online, you're able to get that up so you can see, or at least you'll hear me talk about it, and you can go look at it later. So we're just going to work with the first 5 sections of the Diamond Sutras. There's 32 sections in all. And there's different teachings about how those, the significance of those different parts. One of the really ancient ways of thinking about this sutra is that the core of the sutra teaching is these 5. So these 5 are kind of the whole thing. And everything after that is a rephrasing of the sutra again and again. In one way of thinking about it, actually, the whole sutra is the first section. Ooh. Did everyone wake up? that this first section here, the cause and reason for the Dharma assembly, that's really the Diamond Sutra, and then the rest of the sutra is commentary on that first one. Anyway, there's different commentators have said different things about it. I like to teach this first 5, particularly in the way I was talking about this as an invitation to a lifelong or life's long relationship with these Prajna paramita teachings. To spend time, when you go to the full 32, there's a tendency to get caught up in more of that type of reading for meaning type way of approaching. When you just have 5, it holds you still for a little bit, right? You don't have so many places to go to look for the next interesting thing, the next thing to try to understand, etc. It keeps you in the same place, going around and around and around again. And there's some benefit to that. So that's why, we only have 6 weeks. But even when I teach longer courses or longer series on the Diamond Sutra, I've oftentimes just taught on these first 5 for that very reason. Now, if you like to learn more, have more context, and have more input about the meanings of different things that are in the sutra, and you want to spend time on that, I don't want to dissuade you from that at all. I just don't want you to think that's the central activity of studying the sutra. And so if you're interested in that, I'll just show you a few things that are out there. By no means do you need to read these to follow along and to participate in these 6 weeks, but these are all things that are interesting. The Diamond Sutra, the version of the Diamond Sutra you have in front of you, comes from this book of translations called A Day in the Life. It has 2 sutras in it. One is the Empty Bowl, and the other is the Diamond Sutra. This is a translation by Red Pine. This is a slightly newer translation. He's changed the translation of the Diamond Sutra a little bit in this from this book, which many of you will have seen before, which is quite a thick book, which has the Diamond Sutra translation, and it has quite a bit of commentary that Red Pine has translated and included with it. In the past, when we've studied the Diamond Sutra, we've used this book in this translation. The one here is slightly different, but very similar. The reason I chose this one is because this is the newest one I have. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I don't think it's necessarily the best, but it's, I don't know. I had to choose one today, and that's the one I chose. So another couple books that I would recommend. This is a really marvelous book by Thich Nhat Hanh. This is one of his very early books, The Diamond That Cuts Through Illusion. And this is commentaries on the Diamond Sutra. And the longer I live and the more I read Thich Nhat Hanh, the more I appreciate his depth of wisdom and capacity to express things with such clarity and depth. So I really recommend it. The Red Pine's translation and the commentaries are much more classical type of teaching, which I also love. So I recommend both of those. And then the last one I'd recommend is the Diamond Sutra. This is written by a man named Musong. It has a translation of the Diamond Sutra as well as commentaries. And he does a lot more explaining of technical language and those kinds of things in this book. So the part of you that wants to know, like, okay, this whole business about attributes, what is that? What is an attribute? Where does that come from? What are they referring to? What's the definition? That part of your mind, Musong's going to respond to that in a much more straightforward way. He's going to say, well, attribute is the translation of a word called lakshana. And lakshana comes from the Sanskrit. And the Sanskrit, lakshana means this. And in different times it was interpreted in this way or that way, those kinds of things. So so this is another way to cozy up to the Diamond Sutra. And then finally, if anyone is a Chinese reader or aspiring Chinese reader, I do have the text in Chinese. If you want a copy, just let me know. I can get that for you. It's available online to find in Chinese, but it's a little hard. So if for any reason you're interested in that, you could let me know. I do have copies in Sanskrit. I don't read the Sanskrit. I have the transliteration of the Sanskrit, which means it's written in English script, not in Sanskrit script. which I use to go hunt and peck words when I'm trying to figure out what something was originally in the Sanskrit, but I don't read the Sanskrit. So if you're interested in that, I have that too. This might seem like I'm countering what I was saying a few moments ago about trying to extract meaning. So let me clarify. The reason for all of this kind of study, and again, only if that is something that helps you stay close to the sutra, then engage it. If it's not, then don't. So what I'm saying here is stay close to the sutra. One of the ways to receive it is to become more fully receiving the lexicon from which the sutra, the words of the sutra come to us. So as you become more intimate with the framework of the language and the history, etc., that helps you stay close to the teaching. Right? I wouldn't say that is totally necessary, but it's something that if you're attracted to it, please please do that. And there's lots to receive from that kind of study. I think for those of us who are on that side of trying to be clever, sometimes we need a lot of extra words just to keep us close to the sutra. Yeah, so we have these big books, right? But it's interesting to me. Red Pine, I think he's one of these kinds of people, very clever. And in this volume, which is fairly new, he writes in the introduction. He says, many of you are be familiar with the Diamond Sutra that I published in 2001, in which I put all of this commentary in it. I found that it may be better to understand the sutra without all that commentary, especially for people who actually practice. And so I appreciated that. So I can, and this one I can fit in my bag and carry with me. So I like that too. Okay, I'm going to just talk for a couple more minutes, and then there'll be some time for questions. I want to point people to the titles of these 5 sections. One is the cause and reason for the Dharma assembly. 2 is Subhuti asks for instruction. 3 is the correct source of the great vehicle. 4 is wonderful practice of non-abiding. And 5 is the principle of thusness and true seeing. So as I was saying before, that if we can unhook ourselves from the idea of getting to the punchline, thinking there is a place where the most important information is, one of the ways we can do that is to regard each of the sections as being an important presentation of the teaching. So not skipping over a section to get to another section, but saying the teaching is here in this section. How does it appear in this section? When we look at these 5, we can see that there is a kind of a process happening, or there is kind of different facets of the teaching being presented, these kind of fundamental 5 facets of the teaching. In this first one, the cause and reason for the Dharma assembly, which you'll have a chance to read later if you haven't read it before, this is just a simple description of the Buddha's life. That's it. It's just, he goes for his alms rounds, he eats his meal, he washes his feet, folds his robe, he sits in his appointed place and puts his attention in front of him. And there's a number of monks, 1,250 is the classical understanding, that are there in that assembly with him, and they walk around him 3 times with their right shoulders exposed, and then they sit down to one side. That's a classical way of venerating a teacher. They press their heads to his feet and then walk around him 3 times and then sit down. The cause and reason for the Dharma assembly. Why is the Diamond Sutra assembly even here? Why is there sutras at all? Why are there teachings at all? There's the total simple life of a man that is completely inspiring to this multitude of beings. In the beginning of the sutra, they just talk about monks. At the end of the sutra, it's all kinds of beings, right? So the assembly isn't just those monks. The assembly actually is just a whole host of all kinds of beings from all different realms. The upright simplicity of the Buddha and all of those minds which are trying to understand how it is to live in such an upright and simple way. And from that, one of the assembly Subhuti, he asks for instruction. The question is the sutra. If there's no question, there's no teaching. If that assembly of beings isn't able to call out the Dharma will never be there. And Subhuti's question is precise. How should we practice? How should we live? How should we control our thoughts? And so the Buddha responds with the correct source of the great vehicle. He responds with this fundamental turning. If you think of that image of the Buddha with all of those beings, all beings in the assembly around the Buddha, this is the Mahayana, this great wheel that's turning, in which no being is left off. So he tells us what's the source of that turning, what's the source of the turning of a wheel in which no being is left out. Right? He says it's a thought. He doesn't just say, okay, Subhuti, this is how you're going to control yourself. He says, no, we're not talking about how you're going to control yourself. We're talking about the liberation of all beings. That's where you're going to figure out what it means of how to live. It's not to hold yourself in some form, but it's to be a conduit for that thought, the thought of the awakening of all those beings, which the Buddha there is the hub. Right? And so he reveals that source, and then he says, how shall we practice it? And the section 4 is the wonderful practice of non-abiding. So he reveals the source, but then he gives the practice in which a gift is to be made. Generosity, the fundamental paramita, the fundamental practice on which all other practices are based. And he talks here about the body of merit. He's saying, you look at me and you think I'm just a person. You think I'm this guy who figured something out, who's going to tell you how to figure the thing out. That's not who I am. That's not what a Tathagata is. That's not what a thus come one is. That's not what a Buddha is. The Buddha is not identifiable by those attributes, the ways that you think you know what a Buddha is. Difficult to measure, the Buddha says. Difficult to measure this body. And so then he teaches them about true seeing. He says, what is the principle of thusness? What is the principle of Buddhahood? And what is the true seeing of a Buddha? That means both the true seeing of a Buddha, to see a Buddha, but also the seeing of a Buddha, the way that a Buddha sees, the eyes of a Buddha. And so he speaks of attributes and the way that we get stuck in these marks that we have, these ways we identify things in the world and we turn them into objects, even Buddhas. And so he gives a teaching about what it means to receive those attributes, to regard those attributes, and the non-attributes. Now I always say, if someone were to try to identify where's the punchline, it's in 5. Okay? Don't take the bait, all right? We'll get to it. We'll work with it. But there's a way in which there will be a draw to that one. There'll be a draw to 3. The first one, you'll be like, okay, yeah, I get it. There's a Buddha and there's all these people and stuff. It's like, yeah, okay, Subhuti, would you stop saying the same thing over and over again? That's why the second one, you'll be like, oh, the punchline in the second one is, how do I control my thoughts, right? And then you get to the third one, you'll be like, oh, okay, now we're finally getting to some dharma here, right? It's like, give birth to this thought. But then it's this long thing. It's like all beings that are born in the air or born in the water or have form or don't have form or can have consciousness or don't have consciousness or neither have consciousness or not consciousness. And you're just like, come on, can we get to the punchline? It's like, oh, finally, get to the punchline. Save all beings. But actually, there's no beings that are saved, And you go, okay, that sounds like a punchline, right? So, and then 4 will sound great. You're like, okay, now I know what to do. Give a gift. But give the gift without holding on to the image of a self. Ooh, what does that mean? Right? So then, the true seeing will seem like, oh, this is the key, right? This is the key that will unlock everything else. And in a way it is, but all of them are that. All of them have the teaching inside of it. So when you're in one part of it and you're like, this just sounds totally like, I don't get what he's saying at all. Great. That's good to not understand. Right? And then pay attention to the other parts, pay attention to the other sections. And as the more time you spend with it, the time they'll start to fit together, but they'll fit together through your life and through your seeing and through your exploration, as opposed to, in the sutra, kind of mining meaning in some way. So again, I'd encourage you to stay close to this and bring it into your mind, and we'll continue starting to dive into the text itself next week. Are there any questions?
Could you explain the significance of the 32 sections again?
Yeah, so there's a classical teaching that a Buddha has 32 marks. There's like 32 ways of recognizing a Buddha. One is a golden body. One is, I forget the height, 16 feet. And there's various folds of skin on the neck and so earlobes and this bump on the head. There's 32. And so in that classical way, when people were working with, the Buddha had passed away, the Buddha of this world had passed away, had entered parinirvana, and so they're saying, what would it mean to see a Buddha? And for us, sometimes we can think people are a little dismissive of that. We're like, oh, those silly ancient people, 16-foot golden body. But what they were doing was actually really important, and we haven't lost the capacity, but it's atrophied a lot. And the capacity comes from realizing that our vision is intimately entwined with imagination, that our ability to be able to encounter the world is fundamentally based on image making. And image making is one part of image making is hanging it on like physical things that have a temporal reality. But that's just one slice of what it means to see things. And furthermore, that slice is based on a whole bunch of slices that are not hung on that materiality. So what they were doing was actually deeply profound in the full capacity to engage the imaginal realms, to try to understand what awakening is and what its personification is, the personification of awakening as a Buddha. So you can go and read about those kind of different marks, and there's a part of the Mahayana tradition, and these Prajna paramita teachings also arose in an area around Afghanistan, which is also the places from where Tantra arose, which is deeply involved in what does it mean to see awakening? What does it mean to see a Buddha or to see a Bodhisattva? And these practices that come through Vajrayana traditions now mostly is the like Tibetan Buddhism. But we have that same stream within the Zen school, the iconography that we use, etc. We don't sit and try to visualize a Buddha typically, but there's still lots of that inside of our teaching. So one thing that happened in the Mahayana was that that kind of engagement of the imaginal in terms of seeing a Buddha and what would the marks be. Once textual teaching became common, like once these things were written down and books were made and books were venerated, then the books started to become the body of the Buddha. And so the Diamond Sutra carrying 32 marks is like reminding us that this sutra is not just a bunch of text. It's that thing you were trying to not figure out, like to understand what it was, to actually be able to see a Buddha. Now you have a book that's inviting you into seeing a Buddha, and it is the body of the Buddha. Okay. So it's wonderful to see everyone tonight, and I hope to see you next week.
We close with the Pali refugees, which are also on the last page for the